Today I'm going to run you through an Excel test. So this is a test from a Fortune 200 company, and this was for a position of financial analyst, just to give you a bit of a background. So Excel tests can vary widely from one hiring manager to another, one company to another, but I thought this would be a good example because it's a fairly complex test, so it'd be a good way to sort of get an idea of what might be out there if you're applying for these types of positions. So I'm going to go from start to finish and show you how I'd approach this test. And if you've got other Excel tests that you'd want me to have a look at, by all means email me and I'll do a video on them. So in this example, we're going to start with the introduction. So Company X is planning to do a promotion for the upcoming holiday sales where certain departments will see X% discount. As an analyst, you're tasked with calculating the overall impact to margin. Below lists the planned departmental discount percentage. So we've got the departments and the discount percentages. And it says you're also given the following data shown on the right. So sales data from last year's holiday sales, which are here. And then we've got the SKU, costing, and department information. So for question 1, it says using the data provided to the right and the information above, fill in the table below. So quantity, sales, cost, gross margin, average selling price, minimum average selling price, maximum average selling price, and then what the sales and gross margin looks like after applying those discounts. So there's a lot of fields to fill in, and you might be tempted to try to make use of the most of these fields here and the information you have and try to build a complex Excel formula. I would suggest not doing that, just because, especially if you're doing a test, and you're pressed against time, the last thing you want to be doing is try to overcomplicate things when you don't have to, because it's a lot easier to make mistakes in a situation like that. And, if you're doing an Excel test, the hiring manager is interested in, what your approach is to do these calculations. It doesn't have to be a competition to try to get as much crammed into one formula as possible, because like I said, it's more likely to make a mistake that way. So what I'm going to do is create some extra fields here, because it doesn't say that you have to use what's given to you. You're free to and it's easy to expand onto this. So what I'm going to do is, because I've got the sales data here, I'm going to create a couple of lookups. One, just to pull back in the department. And while you could potentially use a VLOOKUP if you shifted stuff around here, I'd suggest going with an index and match combination. And the main reason being is in a test situation, you want to use you want to show off your abilities and the things that you can do. So, the majority of advanced and intermediate users in Excel probably know how to use a VLOOKUP. Index and match is probably less common. So that's where I would suggest doing something like that. So the index and match, we're going to select the department column because that's the value we want to extract. And then for the row number, I'm going to use the match function to say look up this SKU number in column Q. Look for an exact match, and I'm just referencing the first column because I only have one column in my index. So now I've got my department. The next thing I'm going to do is pull in my cost per unit. Again, same sort of thing, index and match, and I can just copy this formula again. The only thing I'm going to do is, instead of department, I'm going to grab the cost per unit. And this is going to help me calculate my total cost. So for total cost, I'm going to take the cost per unit, multiply it by the quantity, and now I've got my cost. Next up is the selling price. So selling price, I'm just going to take total sales divided by the quantity, and I've got that. I've got a div error here, so divided by 0. This is not a 0 quantity, so I'm just going to use an if error formula at the start here and make it equal to a blank value. And the reason I use a blank is because it's not going to impact the average calculation. So for instance, if I select these two values here, the average still stays at 1391. So it's not dragging it down as if it was a 0 value. The blank value doesn't affect it. For some reason these are still calculating, but they should be fine. Okay, so now I've got my selling price and I've got my total cost. Now what I can calculate is my gross margin before discounts. Okay, so in this case, I'll take the total sales minus the total cost, and that's my margin. This is what I have left over after I've factored in my costs. Okay, and now what I'm also going to do here is pull in the discount. So in this case, I'm just going to do a simple VLOOKUP, use the department number that I've got in here, and do a lookup on this table. Column 2, set it to false. In this case, I want to freeze these values just so they're not moving. And now I've got my discount percentage, and now I can calculate my gross margin after. Now in this situation, since the only thing that's changing is I'm getting a lower sales price, what I can do is take my total sales, times this by a factor of 1 minus the discount rate, and then subtract the total cost. And that'll give me my gross margin after factoring discounts. Because if my sales are going down by 10%, then I'll have 10% less. So in this case, I had $6,000 in sales. So I'm knocking off about $600 off the price. So my margin before goes from $2,916 to $2,309. So around $600 or so. So that's my gross margin after applying those discounts. And so now that I've got all that filled in, what I can do is now start populating these values into my table. Okay, so what I can do is just a simple Sumif function here, and to say, okay, I'm going to look at the department, and if it's equal to this department number, I'm going to pull the quantity. Copy this down, do an auto sum, and then I can do the same thing for sales. So again, I can copy this, and now instead of quantity, I'm pulling the total sales. Copy that down, and this is one of the benefits of organizing your data as a table. It's a lot easier. These calculations are, these formulas are a lot simpler than if I would have to try to not use the table, right? So it's a lot easier once you've organized your data in a way where it's organized. And I think I pulled cost per unit. Should be pulling total cost there. That looks a bit better. Right, so now gross margin, I can do sales minus costs. That is easy enough. Sum that up, 1.12. Gross margin percentage, so this is just taking gross margin divided by sales. Now, if you're not familiar with this, I mean, this is sort of information you'd expect to know if you're applying for financial analyst positions. So don't worry if you don't, if you're not in that field and you're not familiar with some of these percentages. Average sales price. The easiest way to do this is we can just take sales divided by the total quantity, and now we've got our average sale price. For the minimum average sale price, what we can do is use a min Ifs function, and how that's going to work is I'm going to look at the min range. So I've got my selling price in column Z, and then the criteria range is going to be the department, and again select department 1, so $50. And if I want the min for everything, I can just take the minimum of column Z. So now there's also a max ifs function. And in this case, again, I'm going to take the selling price, that's my max range, and from my criteria, take the department, and same sort of logic down here. And then let's use the max function for selling price. Now, anytime you get large amounts or things that look a bit off, it always helps just to maybe do a quick check just to make sure everything looks okay. So for the selling price, I had $9,400. Let's just double check that this looks correct. So that's a big range. You go from, $50 up to $9,500, right? So in this case, it does look okay because here we've got sales of 15,000 for just 3 items. Here is 9,500 just for the 1 item. So it does look that the data is correct. It's just, especially when you're doing like a lot of calculations and you want to make sure that your data is right, it just takes a few seconds to double check and do a quick sanity check to make sure everything looks okay. Now I can move on to calculating the after discount amounts. So in this case, what I'm going to do is take the total sales and multiply it by a factor of 1 minus the discount rate, because I'm getting 10% less for my sales. And in this case, the gross margin is going to be the new sales minus the cost, because I'm not changing the production in this question. The quantity is going to remain the same, so the cost should remain the same. Now my gross margin percentage is going to be gross margin divided by total sales. And so you can see my gross margin went from 27% down to 18.9%. So I can copy all this down and then use an auto sum here. And that. So again, another quick sanity check. So this one, minus 0.5%, that looks a little bit concerning, but when you look at this department, its margin was only 19.6%, and they applied a 20% discount. So already you can see that this is probably not going to end well for this department, that they're going to be in negative territory. So that, again, it looks okay. So I'm going to move on to the next question. So in the second one, it says, in the space below, create a pivot table that shows the gross margin dollar by department, before and after discount, and the gross margin delta, assuming the sales quantity stays the same. So delta is just the difference between these two values. So what I'm going to do is add some more space here, because I'm creating a pivot table. I don't want it to overlap. So insert, shift cells down. And anytime you're doing a test, you always want to make sure you pay attention to the detail, because here it says in the space below. So it's telling you, create the pivot table here. Don't create it as a new sheet, because, they want to be able to know that you know how to put pivot tables in a sheet, because obviously just creating a pivot table is simply just go to insert, pivot table. So this is a little bit more than that. So since I've got my data already organized on this other table here, what I'm going to do is go to insert, pivot table, and then select existing worksheet and select right here in that space and hit OK. And now I've got my pivot table set up. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull in the fields that I need. So I need the department, I need the gross margin before, and the gross margin after. And what I'm also going to need to do is calculate that delta. So what they're testing on you on here is whether you know how to add a calculated field. So if with my pivot table selected, I can go to fields, items, and sets, select calculated field, and I'm going to call this GM dollar delta, and I'm going to take the GM before minus the GM after, add, okay, and now I've got my GM delta. So what I can do here is also format the field settings. Just again, another way to show off, what you're able to do. And these are things that take seconds, but add a bit of polish as opposed to just getting the values. Because with pivot tables, a lot of it is also presentation. We can also change the GM before. So if I go back into here, let's say gross margin before discount. Again, just any sort of way that you can show GM after discount, just to show that you're able to make these changes. You're familiar with doing them. So just call it delta. There we go. So now we've got our total. So we've got the GM before discount of 1.122. We've got after discount 528413. That matches up to here. So it's always good, again, just to sort of check that data, make sure everything looks okay. Make sure our calculated field looks okay. So if I add these two, they add up to 1122,924, so that difference. So I know the calculator field is correct. So those are the main two questions on this test. The third one is a bonus question. Now this one is definitely a bit challenging, and it's not a required one, but it's one that would definitely test your strengths for sure in Excel. So it says, for Department 7, create a sensitivity analysis showing the change in gross margin dollars for discount rates of 10%, 15%, and 20%, and sales quantity increases of 5%, 15%, and 30%. So a lot of stuff jam-packed into that question. So this is a really, really good one, but also a really challenging one. So to create a sensitivity analysis, what we're basically doing is saying, if the discount is 10%, but the quantity increases 5%, 15%, and 30%, what do those numbers look like? So what I would do here is start by just creating a table. So across, I'll have the discount rates of 10%, 15%, and 20. And then down here, I'll have the quantity increase. And I'm going to add 0% to this, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm going to go 0%, 5%, 15%, and 30%. So the basic idea is I'm going to create a matrix here to say, okay, these are the different values, these are the different gross margin dollars based on these different combinations when you've got a discount rate of one of these values and when you've got a quantity increase of these values. So what I'm going to do for starters is I'm going to reproduce my 20% discount at a 0 quantity increase. Because up above here, that's what I did here. I got this negative gross margin, right? And that was a 20% discount, and there was no production change. So my goal is going to be to reproduce this number, because if I'm able to do that, then all I have to do is change my calculations slightly to reflect these different headers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is create a couple of, create some rough work, I guess I'll call it. So gross margin and my delta, just to make sure that I'm reproducing everything correctly. So the first thing I'm going to do is start by calculating the revenue. So the revenue in this case is going to be a function of quantity. So I'm going to take the original quantity, multiply that by 1 plus the increase. And in this case, my increase is going to be 0% because I'm not changing it. So again, I'm doing just trying to reproduce what I had before. And then what I'm going to do is multiply this by the average selling price here, and then multiply that by 1 minus the discount and the 20% discount. Okay, so if I close all this up, I've got my revenue of 417,413, and that matches up what I've got there. So that looks right, 417,413. So I'm confident that I've got that correctly set up. And now what I'm going to do is calculate the cost. So I'm going to take the cost, the total cost that I had here, times that by the increase in quantity, which is going to be 0. Now, I don't have enough details here to know whether the increase in quantity is of the high cost items, of low cost items. And, in tests like this, you'll have to make your own assumptions. So it's a lot easier to just, state your assumptions if you need to, and do your calculations as based on that, because you don't want to overcomplicate and overthink and go down and try to analyze all these different products. I mean, that's not the point of these types of tests, especially when you're looking at a time frame of 30 minutes where there's not a whole lot of time to do that. So my cost in this case, 419,611, based on, again, the cost that I had before plus the quantity increase. So now my gross margin here, 417, is that minus 21,899. And then if I wanted to see the delta, take that previous gross margin minus this 180. So that's my difference. But that one I don't need. I just need the Actually, no, that is what I need, the change in gross margin dollars. So that's the amount that I want to plot in here. So, and this is the cell that I'm going to put all of this in. So now that I've got these details in, what I can do is just basically create this into one really big formula. And again, this is a lot easier when you break it out into steps. So I've got my revenue minus my cost. So there I got my minus 2198. And now what I can do at the very beginning is pull in that original gross margin amount, subtract, and no, that's not what I meant to do. I actually need to create another bracket around all of this just to make sure this is all calculating separately. So now I've got my gross margin. So, and there we go. That looks right at 104.35. So now the beauty of this is now I've got my calculations set up that I've got these different rates factored in. So now the key is freezing these values so that I can copy these formulas over. So I'm going to look at F27, the gross margin, that needs to stay constant. C27, again, the quantity needs to stay constant. B66, that one I just need to freeze the side of it. Anything that's in row 27 needs to be frozen. E65, so that is this value, so I need to freeze the row. Then E27 is my cost. B66, again, freeze the left hand side. So by freezing this, I can copy these formulas down and across and fill in the rest of these values, and just like that I've done my sensitivity analysis. Now what I can do is also, if you have the luxury of time at this stage to test your calculations, you can certainly do that. Now one of the ways that we can double check our work here is by trying to reproduce this using a margin analysis. So the two numbers I'm going to try to double check are this 105.012 and this 37.183, because those are some of the largest differences. So what I'm going to do is calculate what the new price is, the cost, the new margin, and then the delta, the difference. Okay, so in the case of, I'm going to call this 30%, 10%. And so to prove this out, what I'm going to do is calculate my new price, which is going to be my average selling price, times that by 0.9 to reflect the 10% discount. My cost, I'm assuming, is going to remain the same average cost. And so my new margin is 702 minus 628. And so my margin on after the discounts is going to be 74.82. And so what I can do now is take this amount and multiply it by the quantity, which is 668, but I have to factor in that 30% increase. So with the 30% increase, my margin is going to be 64.971. And what I can do now is take that initial gross margin, subtract that to arrive at my difference. And so that gives me 37,183.27. Now if I were to do this again, 30% and this time 20%, this time what I'm going to do is take my average selling price, times it by a factor of 0.8, and then let's just say the average cost is the same, so minus this, and then let's take that margin, multiply it by, in this case it's going to be again a 30% increase, so this times 1.3 gives me the negative margin that I had, my gross margin here minus that, so we've got my 105.012.81. So if you have the time, if you're able to do a spot check and a double check your work, that's obviously helpful. But in an exam situation, under a bit of duress, it's easier said than done. But I just want to show you a couple ways where you could try to arrive at the same sort of calculation, just doing a different approach. But the main takeaway I would say for anybody who's doing an Excel test is don't assume that what they give you is what you have to start with. In this example, I built out this table just to make it a bit easier, doing it in steps, so that way it's easier to organize, easier to put in a pivot table, and to collect your thoughts to make sure that you're on the right path. Because trying to do this in one or two really complex calculations to try to squeeze all this in would be a lot more difficult. As long as you follow the logic, make your own assumptions, whether they're wrong or not, it doesn't really matter. The point is, as long as the logic makes sense and the way you're calculating it flows, that's the most important thing, because after all, it's an Excel test. So they're going to be looking to see that you know how to organize your data, that you know how to use Excel functions, how to make pivot tables, and those sorts of things. So as long as you're, I think, in the ballpark, as far as your margins go and things looking like they're calculating properly. In this example, saying that you pulled the wrong number or the average should have been calculated this way. I mean, those are nitpicky items that you probably don't want to worry about, much less stress about during exam situation. So that's this Excel test. So obviously it took right up around 30 minutes, and that's with going through that bonus. So as you can see, this was definitely not the easiest Excel test, but it's just more that it was a time-consuming one, that if you did go through the bonus and that sort of stuff, and I'd imagine that in these situations they'd be impressed if someone probably started the bonus and got to that section, because obviously they knew that these two questions would take a bit of time, unless you're really ambitious and tried to steamroll through it and do it quickly. But again, there's more of a chance for error, and anytime you're doing a test, it's always important to focus on trying to be as accurate as you can be, as opposed to going quickly and making a lot of mistakes. So that was this Excel test. If you have one that you'd like me to have a look at, please visit my site and contact me, and I can go through it if you like. Other than that, hope you found this useful, and good luck if you are taking an Excel test.